Hello and welcome. I'm coming to you live from the Drucker Forum TV at the Hofburg Palace. It's such a great pleasure this afternoon to be interviewing Michael Watkins. So I'm joined by Michael Watkins. He is co-founder of Genesis Advisors and a professor of leadership at the IMD Business School. Welcome, Michael. How are you doing today?
I am doing wonderfully well, and it's great to be with you.
Yeah, well, Michael, it's really interesting. I have had a sneak peek at your latest book called The 6 Disciplines of Strategic Thinking, which is kind of the theme for today's discussion. And I have a few questions prepared for you. But I wanted just to start off just by telling the audience a little bit about you. You are inducted into the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame. Recognition for all of your outstanding contributions. And I think you've spent the last 2 decades working with leaders as they transition to new roles. And I think this is particularly apt for this the theme of the conference this year, which is creative resilience. So without further ado, let's delve into the book, 6 Disciplines of Strategic Thinking. So can you tell me a little bit about why you wrote this book?
Sure. So just by the way, on the Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame, I tell people I was really hoping for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I guess I'm just going to have to, make do with what I've got, right? So, the genesis of the book was really in work that I do with my clients, which these days are mostly CEOs, either CEOs coming in from the outside or my personal favorite CEOs, first-time CEOs have been promoted from within. And of course, you don't work with those folks very long before, you're talking strategy with them, right? And what you see pretty quickly is that some of them are just kind of exceptional in their ability to really understand, engage with the environment, see what's happening, what's emerging, and others are, maybe not quite as strong on that. And so that really got me thinking. It got me thinking about, okay, what is this thing called strategic thinking anyhow? Is it something we can develop in people? And if so, how? And that was really the genesis of this particular inquiry, Esther.
So, I mean, key question for me is, are we born with it or can we nurture it? And maybe that's what this book is really trying to explore. But is there a case for one or the other, do you think, more strongly?
Yeah, I mean, it's like all great questions about human capability, right? The answer is yes. Yes, it matters sort of what your endowment is, and yes, it matters how hard you train, and that's the analogy I use, right? I don't know if you're a runner, but if you're I'm not, I should say up front. But if you're a marathon runner at an elite level, you probably were born with certain kinds of lungs and certain kinds of muscle tissue. But unless you work super hard to develop that, you're never going to be an elite marathon runner. And it's quite similar, I think, with strategic thinking, right? I think that there are certainly people who are, have something going on in their brains that makes them, inherently somewhat better. They still need to work. And it's certainly true that, even if you're more in the average, there's much you can do to get better.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm not a runner, but I'm an offshore sailor. So there's a lot of planning to do with that, where and when to go and what winds and all the rest of it. Really interesting. And what are the 6 disciplines? And why did you choose those 6? I mean, maybe that's a really, really meaty question, but I'm super interested to know why 6.
Yeah. So maybe back up just a little bit before I answer the question, right? Which is one thing that was really interesting to me about this was, there really wasn't a great definition, in my opinion, of what strategic thinking is. And without a great definition of what strategic thinking is, it's hard to know what to look for. It's hard to know how to assess leaders on it. It's hard to know how to develop leaders' capabilities, right? So for me, the starting point was really, okay, what is this beast? And how do we really, really characterize it? And, when I was doing the interviews for the book, I'd ask folks, especially, people, learning and development people, so what is strategic thinking? And they kind of look thoughtful and well, I know it when I see it, right? Yeah, that's not really going to do it, right? And so we had to kind of dig in further. So that'd be, I guess, point 1. Point 2 is that to me, it boils down to what I think of as a cycle of recognizing, prioritizing, and mobilizing your organization to deal with emerging threats and opportunities. And I think that connects really tightly to the theme for this year around resilience, right? I mean, if you're not doing that, you're not adapting, you're in deep trouble, right? And so in the end, I sort of anchored it in those processes of recognizing, prioritizing, mobilizing. And then what are the mental disciplines that let you do that? Yeah. And, and I'm sure, you work with people who do qualitative research, but eventually, a model emerges, a pattern emerges around this. And for me, the pattern was these 6 distinct elements. And I'll just say, what they are, and then maybe we can dig into any of them if you're interested in ones. Pattern recognition, number 1, can you see what's important in a noisy, complicated, uncertain, ambiguous environment? Yeah, is number 1. Systems thinking, can you build mental models that let you make sense of these complicated environments and know that if something happens over here, it's probably going to have an impact over there, and it may create a feedback loop over here, would be the second one. Third, it's actually a combination. I called it mental agility, but it's really kind of 2 somewhat distinct but related abilities. One is, I call it level shifting. One CEO I work with calls it cloud to ground thinking, right? The ability to move between levels of analysis, from the big picture down into the details, but do it with intentionality, right? And good judgment about where you need to be in terms of altitude. And then more of the kind of the chess master, look forward a couple moves, think about, what's the best move to make here given the current state of the board. So those things I packaged into mental agility. Structured problem solving, that's a bit unusual, I think, but it's really the ability to lead your team through a process of framing and solving the right problems and not jumping to solutions, right? But really doing a good job of the framing. And then the final 2, are visioning, which I think no one's going to dispute is an important thing to do, to envision, desirable futures and begin to then work backward. Okay, how are we going to get there? The final one may be a bit of a surprise, but it turns out to be super important, and that's political savvy, right? Your ability to navigate these complex political systems and mobilize. It gets back into that mobilizing piece, mobilizing people, your team, your organization to really, head in the right directions with the right level of energy.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael. That's great. I think I appreciate that there's lots within those 6, but I guess because you did a lot of research and you probably talked to a lot of people while you were putting this book together, can you kind of tell me a little bit about like a real world example that you think resonates with either one or several of those? I think our audience would love to hear that.
Sure. So one of the main motivating examples in the book is a CEO that I've worked with for now close to 8 years. His name is Eugene Woods, and he's currently the CEO of the 5th largest healthcare system in the U.S. 150,000 employees, 30 billion revenue, many states. And when I started working with him, when he was taking that job originally 7.5 years ago, he was taking over a relatively small, regional system in the Southeast U.S. But he already had a vision for something that would have a national footprint, would begin to really have an impact on healthcare. He's African American, so he's a big believer in health equity and access to care issues. And so there was a part of a vision for that. He defined the mission of the organization as health, hope, and healing for all. So there was an inclusivity to what he was doing. But he's just masterful at imagining, engineering. He's a consummate deal maker. He was able to pull things off that I don't think anyone thought was going to be possible. And to me, he just exemplifies, all of these elements, right? And by the way, it's unusual for people to be good at all of this. You've got people who are really good on pattern recognition and, systems thinking and visioning, but they couldn't organize their way out of a wet paper bag, right? Or, really build an alliance to do what needs to be done or lead their team through a process. And he's kind of like a fully formed strategic thinker in the way I think about it.
That's really interesting. I think the second discipline of strategic thinking, you actually mentioned it as well. It relates to the creative resilience theme of this year's forum. We're exploring, leadership and leading in an age of discontinuity. So what do you think what role does strategic thinking play in building these kind of forward-thinking, creative organizations?
Yeah. So, to me, I guess strategic thinking is kind of the tip of the adaptive spear, as it were, right? I mean, unless you're really, sensing and responding to what's going on in the environment, you know, I guess resilience would still be a good thing until you really got beaten to a pulp, right? But you're not, you're not going to adapt, you're not going to flex, you're not going to shape the game in a way that needs to happen, right? Because that's what is so essential these days, is to understand and make sense of what's happening. And it's so complicated, right? I'm personally very interested in AI these days. Wow, right? It's mind-blowing what's happening. Political environments, economic environments, right? So you need to be able to sense and respond to what's going on, and you need to be proactive in shaping it, right? And in the end, that's what I think strategic thinking lets you do, And so without it, and by the way, I don't think it's enough, right? I mean, I always say that I view organizational agility as being kind of complementary and co-equal, right? It's not like strategic thinking alone is going to help you, but the absence of strategic thinking is going to be a very large problem.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned that it's not standalone. I mean, you're an international bestseller the first 90 days. That's the onboarding Bible. It's considered the onboarding Bible, and there's lots of sort of expressions that you've coined. So I agree, it's not sort of a standalone thing. I do have a bit of a cheeky question for you, and take it as you will. Can you separate strategy from thinking? Because it's strategic thinking. Can you separate them?
Yeah, no, I think you can, right? And I think that part of what was so interesting for me in going down this road was to see that most of the time when people were trying to talk about strategic thinking, they were talking about strategy and not about thinking, right? They were talking about strategic frameworks, they were talking about strategic analysis, I mean, they're kind of wrapping the strategic thinking label around it, but really what they're talking about is strategic analysis, and that's only a very small part of strategic thinking in the end. So I think you really can separate those things. And part of what I hope the contribution of the book is going to be is to focus really on the thinking part, right? Not so much on the strategy. I don't think you'll find a strategy framework in the book, right? There's no 5 forces, there's no handbrake, there's no strategic diamond, there's no blue ocean strategy. Because I think, a lot of really terrific work has been done on strategy, not so much on strategic thinking.
That's really interesting. I think the kind of last question, because we're running almost out of time here, it relates to kind of the younger generation. So I think, I'm going to put on my younger generation hat here, because years ago I came to the Drucker Forum.
It's really not fair of you, Esther.
Because years ago I came as a Drucker Challenge winner, and I just wonder, how did you get into this? What can you say to inspire these young people that have come today, that have written these amazing essays? What is it that got you interested in this stuff, and how was that journey? What did that journey look like?
Okay, so back in the early Paleozoic era, right, when I was doing my PhD at Harvard, I had a professor who taught us qualitative methods of research named By Barnes. And his basic tagline was, wade into the swamp, right? Wade into the phenomenon, dig into the phenomenon, sink yourself, into the ooze and let it kind of flow into you. And as you do that, you begin to see patterns, right, emerge. You begin to see consequential phenomenon, right? And so, in the book, I basically say that, to be a great strategic thinker, you need to be immersed in a domain or a discipline. Research is no different, in my opinion, right? And so that would be the advice. Like, don't be shy about wading into the swamp and getting into the phenomenon and really, seeing what happens when you do that.
Amazing. Thank you for that. We're almost out of time. One last pearl of wisdom for our audience. It's just been so great talking to you. Is there something else you wanted to share with us before we go back to Drucker TV?
Look, you picked the right theme for this year's conference, right? If we've lived at a time that is more challenging for our species than what we're currently experiencing, I'm hard-pressed to point to what it is, right? I mean, we face truly existential challenges on many, many dimensions. Creative resilience is what's going to take us through it. That's the bottom line.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time today. And to the audience, I hope you enjoyed that segment of Drucker TV. Thank you.